the presentation. If you'd like to get back up again and get some dessert, that would be the thing to do. We're going to go ahead and start our presentation. Anytime would be good. And yeah, let's just go right ahead and start it off. This is I'd like to introduce Lance Bobble. Who is our new historian. We never really made it official in the village to actually have him take the baton over. I think maybe we'll go through some. You are but I think we all know Bill Ryan was probably a historian for over 30 years, I think 40 years, maybe 100. But Bill actually did. He called me in for a meeting, and he sat me down and he said, you know, it's been a long time, and I'm ready to step down. And I was ready to, and of course inside I'm going, oh, do I really want to take this on? And he goes, I think you're too young. So we decided to go along with things.
He never asked me if I was too old.
So without any more further ado,
Oh, you're welcome to say.
I'll sit.
Been a teacher all my life. I think I can project to the back of the room, but if you can't hear, like that guy back there, let me know and I can switch to the microphone. I just prefer not to do that. So when Scott said we ought to have this slice of history tonight, he promised me that all my friends would show up, and they're both here. So, they came to see Norma. But that's been a lot of fun to put this together. So I got a couple questions to ask you as an audience. Trying to get a flavor of who's here. If you lived in the village for less than 10 years, would you stand up and acknowledge that fact? I don't see a lot of young faces here, but if you were born while your parents were living in Round Lake, would you stand up? And if you hated history class in high school, or ever fall asleep in this class, no, just leave. And the other thing is, please lock the doors. I think the copyright police will be after me pretty soon. Good. Okay, let's get started. So the question is, how did Round Lake get here? So there we are on the map, a little bit north of Clifton Park, near the confluence of the Hudson River and the Mohawk River. 20,000 years ago. The Great Ice Age was passing. There was a big dam formed by the ice down there, and the Mohawk River took a path that went across Folsom Lake, Round Lake, and met the Hudson River down near Candyville. And that's how Round Lake got here. We're done. James Polk, 10th President of the United States, 1845, 1849, has nothing to do with it. The thing I want you to do is remember those dates.
It's our history class.
So when I started thinking about talking tonight, I decided it would be important to put Round Lake into the events of the country. And so you think about the Civil War taking place between 1861 and 1865. It ends, and the country is becoming new again, I suppose. 1865, Abraham Lincoln's assassinated. His funeral train comes up from Washington, D.C., passes through Albany on its way to Illinois. Of course, right after that, Andrew Johnson becomes the 17th President of the United States in 1865. And those are the things that had happened in the country just before Joseph Hillman has come back from Oak Bluffs on Pleasant Vineyard and tries to convince the people in Troy to create a camp meeting ground to replicate what's been going on at Oak Bluffs. If you haven't been to Oak Bluffs, you ought to go. It will remind you of home. The other thing about Troy at the time, Troy was probably the fourth wealthiest city in the country at the end of the Civil War. And so there's a lot of money to be found in Troy. 1868, President Johnson is impeached. And in 1868, the Troy Methodist Church comes up looking for a spot for a camp meeting ground and discovers a piece of property between the Saratoga-Albany Railroad and the lake that we now call Round Lake. First camp meeting was held on September 1st of that year, and there were over 200 tents being used with about 8,000 people in attendance. So they started out at a big time, sort of. Recently, a historian from New Jersey sent a letter to Bill and said, I found in the records that Round Lake lent us over 200 tents for one of our meetings. And the question is, where did the tents come from? And the answer is, they're left over from the Army in the Civil War. So one thing I'll say is, there are going to be a lot of pictures here. I'm not claiming that the pictures are exactly a date. They're here to represent some of the stuff that's going on. So here's some of the tents. Here's the police station for all the unruly Methodists. And in 1868, Ulysses S. Grant is elected to office and takes office in 1869. Ooh, go back one. Yeah. So in 1869, there were already 13 cottages that had been built. Here's a picture of some of the early ones. These may not be the original ones. And when you look at these pictures, look, you can go back. I had 3 pictures there of these cottages, and I decided that there are 3 pictures of exactly the same cottage. So this is the better one. 1871, 20,000 people arrived for camping here. I think in September of that year. And that's considered to be the largest camp meeting that was ever held in the United States.
Lance, what happened in 1870?
What's that?
What happened in 1870?
This one.
Oh, no.
COVID.
Gotta rest. No, I mean, I'm picking up what I thought were pretty important highlights of year to year. So here's the speaker stand that was built approximately in front of our current library here in Fulton at the end of the space that was being used for the gatherings. Here's another picture with the speaker stand in the background and benches out in front that have been placed in the open area, the area we consider the auditorium now. By 1872, 40 cottages had been built. They built a bookstore, they built offices, and they are beginning to become a real community. So here's the bookstore and the superintendent's office, sort of identical buildings. Again, down here, you can see the fountain there on the left-hand side of that picture, down in that area. And those two buildings were later moved to create the house that is to the right of the library that we're all familiar with. So they were put together at right angles and now received as a house. Here's a picture that shows the transition between cottages and tents. A row of cottages up there on the left, and a row of tents on the right.
Looks like markets.
What?
Looks like markets.
When I started taking, this goes back a long time, but I started taking close-up pictures of the historic pictures back in the day before digital all filmed. And as I look at these pictures, I say, wow, everybody's fancy. And my decision was, if a photographer came to town, you got to be fancy because you might get in a picture. And that's my interpretation. I don't know. Here, more cottages. So in 1873, the train station is built. There's been enough traffic on the train to get here to Round Lake. And a train station was put in place. A fence was put around the village so that they could charge admission. And the main gate was there at the train station. Now, some of these pictures are in color, and the color pictures are scanned from postcards primarily. And postcards at this time were probably printed in the late 1800s, maybe early 1900s. And they were all hand-colored. And most of them were hand-colored in Germany. And what happened was, you could see pictures of the same thing over and over again, and there are lots of different colors perhaps, because somebody gets instruction to paint the building or whatever's in front of you, and they get to be looking different depending on who's done the work. So where's the train station? Well, here's the railroad tracks. Now, when Norm and I moved to the village, we referred to them as the tracks. You say, oh, let's go to the tracks. Well, there are no tracks there. But there is now a bike path. And underneath the bike path, but anyway, it's where that's the bike path took the location of the railroad train. And so the train station there is about where the bulletin board is at the turn when you come down into the village. We covered that area. The Curry Road, I told, actually, or the traffic used to go under this end of the train station until the trucks got too big, so they blocked off that end of the train station, and then eventually, of course, the train station has disappeared. Yes?
If you walk up the Zimset Trail, there's a concrete pillar that says A19 and RP 165. That's Albany is 19 miles on the railroad. Rouse's Point is 165 miles on the railroad. That's what that concrete pillar is.
Haven't you guys worked for the railroad?
right next to Randall on the postcard.
So out on the lake, there was a ski boat, and the name of the ski boat was Ordelia. And Ordelia is the wife's, Joseph Hilton's wife's thing. And that was on the lake for a few years. Scott, I had idea how many years?
I'm not sure how many years, it wasn't on there for very long.
Not very long. It would take 20, 30 people at a time to paddle around the lake. The steam engine, and to my knowledge, it is at the bottom of the lake. So if you've got scuba gear, you can have fun this summer trying to find
Lance?
Yeah.
What year was the train station formed out?
we get that. We're going in numerical or across. In 1875, with Saratoga Springs close by, a geologist comes and suggests that perhaps there are springs available here in Round Lake. So they started digging. Now, I'm not sure if digging and drilling are all the same thing, but at 1,403 feet, they found a very nice mineral spring that they used for drinking water in the village. It was bottled at some point, maybe not bottled here in Round Lake, but at least bottled. And people found it very enjoyable for flavor. And then at some point in time, maybe about 10 years after they found it, they decided, oh, we need to open that up and get a bigger flow. They dropped down what is called a torpedo, and they completely shut the spring down. Yeah. Oh, the spring was located where we would say is the open area between the current Methodist Church and the Lakers restaurant, right in that area.
So if there's water in the basement.
What's that?
If there's water in the basement.
So here's the gazebo that was built over the spring, and I think they were charging for the water. But again, another picture of fancy. If you didn't see it. 1876, a tent is placed over the open area of what we think of as the auditorium now, to protect people from the elements a little bit. And this image is actually taken from that picture right over there. It's one of those little frames there. I don't think, I've never seen an actual photograph of that area. But this is Harper's Weekly. If you look at that centerfold, Harper's Weekly report about being here in Round Lake. So that's the only tent picture that I'm aware of. So we start moving along. The Hotel Wentworth is built. Hotel Wentworth is located, as another picture we'll show you a little bit later on, but it's located across the street from the Methodist Church. You guys, I'm looking over here. It's big. There's a big dining hall. People sit out on the porch and do handwork. Women, probably card playing for the men, although that's not allowed. Maybe that'll stay inside. It's 3 stories tall and it has this large porch. This is a hotel. Another view of it from the other angle. In 1878, the religious fervor is going on, and they decide to build Palestine Park. So Palestine Park down along the lake is about 500 feet long and 100 feet wide. And it is a reproduction of the area of Palestine, so you could walk over it and see the locations of the various places. Here's a worker building it, yeah.
If you go to the Chicago Institute, there's the same exact one on the lake, and you can walk through it and see the recreation, and you can walk through Palestine, and they have all of the buildings and all of the towns.
Stay here in Round Lake, please. We need you here. Yeah, Norman and I have been wanting to go to Chicago. Haven't gotten there yet. But they used to take classes down there, 2 or 3 sermons a day, down in Palestine Park, touring, going around to see the physical location. And as we go back to this is the creek that enters the lake where we now kayak through. And of course, all this, there's nothing really visible there any longer. So, Round Lake was laid out as tent sites for the visitors, and this map was reproduced, and a lot of people have copies of it. And I asked Sharon a few days ago if she had a picture of it that had the map, and she graciously let me into her house so I could take a photograph of it. And I had to do a little editing here because my camera made a big flash from that, so I did a little bit of editing. But the reason I like this one is because it does show us Palestine Park up there. So this has to have been drawn or used after the origin of Palestine Park. And the largest tent lot number that I found on this map is, I wrote it down, 1,318 tent sites available on this map. Yep.
Did they actually fill that up? Or was that just like the map of what they were hoping to do? Was there actually a, 1 year when like all those spots were filled with tents?
I would doubt that they were all filled. I mean, particularly when you think on this side of the railroad tracks, the west side, and there are a couple streets there. There's actually New York Avenue, which we know exists, but this part of New York Avenue doesn't. And Griffith, I think, is down here, and that's down there. So, yeah, I doubt there was ever a time when they were really filled up with tents. And I've got some more maps that are coming up to help you think about that. But they were laid out. Number 1 was close to the auditorium. And as I said, the one I could identify there, being very ambitious, 1,300 tent sites. 1880, the Flowery Orient is built. The Flowery Orient is built. And again, a large hotel. It's built by a person by the name of Mrs. Newman. And the intent of the hotel was for rest and relaxation of missionaries. And they may actually perhaps lead into the name that the Orient got. There's a picture available that shows the staff of the Orient on the porch one day, 25 people in the staff running both the kitchen and the hotel. Another view of the Orient.
Where was that?
Well, we're going to get to that. Yeah, I can describe it, but I've got maps and I fully intended that question. Yes?
Is that the sign from the Orient?
Oh, you didn't see me pointing at that time?
No, I didn't.
Yes.
I was
And that sign, of course, is from the train station. I'm sorry, I meant to point that out earlier. Alumni Hall. Our neighbor. Still there.
Still there.
Lisa, there you go. A wonderful building. Let's see what happened. It was used as offices for the association when it was first built. It was later used for classrooms for the training of missionaries, Sunday school teachers, and people that are interested in Christian education, basically. So eventually, in 1884, a building, or at least a booth, is erected to cover the seating area of the what is now the auditorium. And in this picture, you can see the open sides, the flat ground where the benches were placed, and that was, what's the date I had on that? 1884. 86, the arcade is built. Everybody familiar with the arcade? The arcade was kind of a modern day mall, I suppose, or an original mall. It had a post office in it. It had a dry goods store. It had a druggist. It had a furniture store. It had a photographer. It had a bookstore. It had a jeweler and a barber. Now, I'm not sure if they had those all at the same time or not, but it was a commercial center in the village. And if you look at this picture, you're looking down through the use on this side, use on this side, and we're looking down First Street to the auditorium, which is down there. And this is a ticket booth. And over there on that picture, you see a very close, very good picture representation of that. So here we are, again, with a colored photograph or a colored postcard, and who knows if those colors are anywhere accurate. This picture, I think, is the picture I like the best of all the pictures because it is really, really sharp. And it is looking at the arcade, looking west down First Street. And we see a sign here to the Orient, so it's sending you over there. This says First Street up here, but it is so sharp, and it shows exactly. And the other thing is the other postcard pictures of the arcade did not show that tower that was there, and this one catches it.
Is that a postcard picture, Lance?
What's that?
Is that a postcard picture?
It is not.
No,
It's,
okay.
it's an actual.
And Lance, where's First Street now? That's
First Street is about 5 feet from me,
oh, okay.
out that window. Yeah,
I know that's second.
that's a good question.
Right in front of
I at one point, place called I don't know why we purchased that picture. Yeah,
I thought from my limited research that on the river, one of these paddle boats became a casino. I mean, on the lake,
on the
one of
lake.
the paddle boats became a casino.
Scott, you have the
That's why I had no, I never heard that.
Because
I can see that happening today.
We'll write it.
That's what-
His family had it on the lake.
Right, and, right, and yes, there was a casino, but I think like Lavery's Casino post-date this picture of the arcade. I'll tell you why. So I don't know exactly what the reference is in this particular picture. Year later, Griffin Institute is built. The gentleman in the portrait back there is Mr. Griffin. And he had money. He had a lot of money. So the other thing that's happening in this period of time is that things are changing. The interest in the actual camp meeting grounds is in decline in the early 1880s. In fact, in 1883, there was no camp meeting here. So when we look at this series of pictures that we started around 1884 and stuff, there's a real resurgence that's going on in the village. And part of that resurgence is to make a change from the camp meeting mode to more education. And the Griffin Institute was built as a school to have religious education for young men and women. And so Mr. Griffin spends, what is it, I guess $12,000, $17,000 to build this building. And they start having classes there during the summer months particularly. Garnsley Hall is built. Is that the same year? Yes, the same year. Garnsley Hall was built by Carolyn Garnsley, who's another famous woman in the village. A lot of money. She spent about $8,000 to build Garnsley Hall. It's a 32-bed dormitory for young women. And the young women went to school at the Griffin Institute. So this is another picture of Garnsley Hall. George West Museum. Prominent building overlooking the lake down where the labyrinth now is. George West is an interesting guy. He's a businessman. He's from Boston Spa. He later becomes a congressman. He is credited with the design of the flat bottom brown paper bag. So the next time they ask you what to check out, do you want paper or plastic? Make sure you ask for paper. He also spends $17,000 to build the museum. It's a real museum. They charge to get in. It has oil and watercolor art. It has plaster cast of particularly good statuary, a large collection of rocks, wood. Art classes are held here in the tower. Oh, you don't see the tower in this picture yet. So here's a picture. There's a large collection of Ulysses S. Grant memorabilia that's in the collection after Grant dies. Flags that were used over his coffin, that sort of thing. And it's closed in 1919. After that, it's used as a school, and it's used as a school building here in Round Lake. I think one of these pictures that I have here says a high school in Round Lake, yes. It's used at the school up until 1954 when the Shenandoah District opened, and everybody starts going down to Shenandoah. So when Shenandoah District was organized, if you ever look at a map, Shenandoah is a big rectangle, and Round Lake sits up in the upper right-hand corner, or maybe it's the upper right-hand corner, and it was the largest center of population for the entire district. North Lake comes in, but we're now moving 7,000 kids with high school education out there here. Kennedy Hall. Amy, I think this is from you. Kennedy Hall was built, and it was funded by Nancy Kennedy, and it was a 54-bed dormitory for young men. So the Garnsley Hall for women, Kennedy Hall for men, feeding into the Griffin Institute for their summer school education. The Russell House was built. Now this is a building you probably recognize, and it has a lot of different names over the years. Some of them white, and that was less. Anyway, so it's built one of the smaller hotels at the time, but it is one that still survives. 1888. The addition to the auditorium is constructed to house the Davis Ferris Tracker organ, which was purchased in New York City. Now, when I started, what were the dates that I wanted you to remember?
1849.
So that organ is being built in New York City when James Polk is president. And it's shipped up here, purchased, shipped up here by a train barge, is the typical description that's given. And the auditorium is expanded. This is not necessarily a picture from early on, but it's a picture showing how the auditorium may have looked at some point. Lots of flags. And the organ back there. And then a more contemporary picture of the organ as we know it today. One thing to do when you go into the auditorium next, if you haven't ever noticed this, is that over the seating, there are iron pipes that are part of the structure for the roof. But where the organ is, there are wooden beams. And so that end with the wooden area is the addition that was built in order to house the organ back there. In 1892, the All Saints Episcopal Church is constructed. And then you ask yourself why. It's been a Methodist camp meeting ground since 1867, and they built an Episcopal church first. And of course, the answer is, for all those years, they've been using the auditorium as their religious site for their services. So they don't need a Methodist church, and they don't really probably want the Episcopals in the center of town so often.
Whose house is that?
That's Lansing North.
Norman. So they takes about 3 weeks. They raise about $129 for the expense, and they're ready now to have the money to have the lamps lit during the winter months. Now, I've never seen a description of how the money was raised. I guess the amount.
It's Round Lake, and that's.
But I'm pretty sure that the women were well-educated women, and my guess is that some of them were aware of a Greek play called, what's the name? What? Yeah, Lysistrata, right? Yeah, I don't know why that fell out of my mind. So, if you haven't giggled or laughed at that, look it up.
Come on.
What's the name again?
Lysistrata. It's a Greek play. Oh,
What's it about, Lance?
it's about kerosene.
That was for a hot time.
So after the kerosene club has gotten money raised, they decide to venture on to something bolder and bigger. And they create the Women's Round Lake Improvement Society. And the mission of the society is to make Round Lake desirable as a place of residence in other ways, to study and keep pace with the progressive spirit of the age, and to maintain the library. So in 1897, a cottage known as Clark House is rented by from Carolyn Garnsey to be used as a library, and the library starts out with a collection of about 400 books, which the people of Round Lake donate. And later on, when Carolyn Garnsey dies, she bequeaths the building for permanent use of the library. And here is a fairly old photograph. Here's the fountain. Here's the library reading room as we know it. The house next door, which had been put together for the bookstore and the superintendent's office. Now, the history of women's suffrage. So, I'll tell you a little bit more in a minute about why this is here. But anyway, the famous Elizabeth Cady Stanton meeting in Seneca Falls, when's it take place? 1848. Who's president? James Hall. That's now, of course, a National Historic Site out there in Seneca Falls. In 1866, a year before Round Lake is formed, the debate is going on in Congress, headed by President Lincoln, to create the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. And what does that do? Number one, it frees all the slaves that were in the states that were in rebellion against the country, but it also extends the voting right privilege to, quote, male citizens. In 1868, now, Johnson is now president, and the 15th Amendment is proposed to the Constitution, and it grants voting rights to just men. So the history that I found on the web here talks about this period of time from 1880 to 1890. That's what we've been talking about recently. And it says that women are becoming more active. They're getting involved as members of women's clubs, professional societies, maybe not temperance advocates, I'm not sure, local civic charity organization, or we could say the Women's Round Lake Improvement Society. Woodrow Wilson is elected in 1912, and in the middle of his second term, in 1918, he goes to the Senate and he asks for the women's right to vote. He wants an amendment which will create that. Now, he's tried to do this before and got nowhere because of the Congress. So in 1916, a Republican Congress was elected, and they were liberal enough to say this needs to be done. So August 26, 1920 is recognized as the day of the ratification of this amendment. So here's a picture. If you were standing up at the end of Grove Park and looking down, you recognize this house. It's still there. These are the arches of the arcade. There's the auditorium and the ticket booth way down there. And there's a house sitting there. The fire starts in the arcade. This is part of the arcade foundation. Now, why did I add women's suffrage to my talk? This picture. This picture is standing by these firewomen in 1921. The year before she could not vote. That's the picture that got me out of that. So here's a map prior to the fire. We see the blue rectangle is the arcade, drugstores. This is First Street going down to the auditorium over here. And the red areas are cottages. Row Park in front, along 2nd Street, Library Lawn now. And there it is after the fire. 16 houses are burned, cottages are burned, the arcade is burned. First Street, as somebody asked a few minutes ago, runs 5 feet outside that window. So this is the current building here now that has been built, but the parks are empty. So we have a fire in 1921 that really highlights an end of an era, as far as I can tell. Here's what's been built between 1872 and 1921, all across the village.
Do they know what started the fire?
It was detected about 4 a.m. in the morning by a kid, I think, right? Does that sound familiar?
Sounds familiar, yeah.
Yeah, something like that. It was in the arcade, maybe in the bakery, I don't know. I don't know. But anyway, again, previous picture, identifying all these places that I talked about. Take away the labels. There they are. So what's been happening then between just before 1930 and then just after 1930? Well, what happens is that they're beginning in the late 1880s, 1890s, there's this decline in the camp meeting work. And so the village has made a transition into religious schools, Griffith Institute, Kennedy Hall, Garnsey Hall, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the decline has started, and the fire is part of that decline. So here we go. I asked the question earlier. What has disappeared? Palestine Park closed down in 1885. The fire of 21. 22, half of the Hotel Windsor burns down. The Wentworth Hotel is destroyed by fire in 33, 46. The Griffin Institute is torn down because it's no longer used. Orient Hotel and Garnsey Hall are probably 10 years later are also brought down. The train station is dismantled in 58, so we asked that question, I think. Kennedy Hall comes down in 62, and the George West Museum is torn down in 1965. And finally, the railroad tracks are actually picked up and taken away. Those are the places that are gone in Round Lake. By 1965. Who's here that's been in the village since 1965? Anyone? 66. 66? Ah, you missed the prize. So this is what remains. This is what remains today of the things I talked about. Plum Night Hall, Russell House, Methodist Church, Oregon, Auditorium, the Oregon. There they are. Quite a difference. So what happens after that? Well, 1968, the Round Lake Centennial happens. It's going to be 100 years. But then the Round Lake Association is dissolved, disappears. Residents vote to form the village of Round Lake. You've had leases on tent lots. You now get deed to your property that's defined by those leases. The village gets placed on the National Register of Historic Places in 75, and a fairly valuable HUD grant is received in 1980 that helps some residents make improvements on their houses. So now is a list of what I would call the heroes of the last 60 years or so, 70 years. Helen Hera was an organist. She had lived in one of the cottages that had been destroyed by the 1921 fire. She leaves town for a few years, moves back, and when she moves back, there's a movement going on in the village that says, tear down that ugly barn. And of course, that ugly barn is the auditorium. She's an organist. She declares the organ is a wreck, and she goes about to get it repaired. She now spends from 1954 until about 1968 organizing the work, paying for the work, getting the help of her son, Jack Lewis, and the organ gets repaired so that it is playable by the time the 1968 centennial.
Oh.
And both fondly and
Be careful.
And fun.
in 1965, she takes on the task of working with the auditorium, preparing, maintaining the organ. She starts the regular summer organ concert series. She raises money for the maintenance of the organ. The auditorium, when Norm and I moved into the village, was battleship gray. It was leftover paint from the Army. And she makes a donation to the fire company, and the volunteers in the fire company paint the auditorium for the first time in years. All right.
What year was that, Lance?
That's a good question. I've got the newspaper article when that was done, but it was probably, that would be 70, it'd have to be after 73, because that's when Norm and I moved in. So it's in that late 70s or mid-70s. The auditorium windows had basically all been broken by stones, probably. And so she gets plexiglass and covers the big panels to protect the auditorium. She gets replacement seats installed. The movie theater on the Lens Walls is being torn down. She gets all the seats come down and they get replaced in the village. She asked Whirlus to add a historical society, which it does. And she also owned Alumni Hall, and she turned it into the musical nursery school.
I'm a graduate.
I'm
I'm a graduate.
I'm saying that my son is a graduate.
A graduate also.
And he can't sing.
Oh, everything.
So here's a picture of Edna in front of the organ. It is taken, I think, from a 1985 Tracker magazine organ. There's a whole nice story in that magazine of the organ and her work. In 1973, I think that's the right date, and I apologize if I'm off by a year or so. But anyway, the Round Lake and Peace Festival is begun. What? Yeah, that's why I had 1973 down there. Anyway, Whirlus has been living off money that's been left to Whirlus back in the 1880s and 1890s. And they've got it invested, and they've been using it. And now they need the money. So they start the Antique Festival. Emily Smith was a resident here in the village. And she and her husband did the organization as far as getting dealers, and then all the food and other services, the selling the soda, the picking up of garbage, and all the stuff that goes on with the festival. That was all done by volunteers for many, many years. All that organized by Whirlus. And this date, Sharon's here, is 2005 about right for the starting? Yeah. All right, okay, so I'm a year off. Anyway, Linda Connors and Sharon Waltz talked to Whirlus and said, we ought to do what Oak Bluffs does, and that is to have a night of illumination celebration every year. And so that begins. The Antiques Festivals that got everybody involved in one way or another, so it seemed like a good time to do that. So the picnic dinner was added, the sing-along was added, and the nominee recognition of the nominee was added. The first nominee was at Fantasy, and to date there have been 15, with a couple of years off due to COVID. Here's a picture from Molly Shapiro, the Diane Putney, and this is the way the auditorium looked last year, was it?
Yes,
Yeah. These lanterns along the bottom are the called honoree lanterns. They all have their price tags involved. Not really, but they all have the year that the honoree was selected involved. And when you look around the village and see those lanterns, that's why the tags are there. War heroes. Barbara Guan, Mayor Sachs, Lydia Hoffman. Initial research has been done to celebrate the history of the organ here in Round Lake. And Mayor Sachs asked Lydia to put together a nomination for the organ to put in front of the National Park Service. So Lydia does 2 years of park ranger. 4 years? No. 4 years. To start with, okay, I'm sorry. 4 years. I think I had 4 years up there for a while. I will change it. Okay. So in late 2015, 68 pages. I have a copy here if you want to read it. No. Goes in front of the National Park Service. They hear the presentation, and then Lydia and the village wait. And then early January 2017, they're accepted the nomination. And it was the last time the nominations for this particular category was done. Is that true, Lydia?
Any landmarks.
Any landmark.
So,
Right, okay. So-
yay,
So at the dedication ceremony, Edna Vandezee, who's been so important in preserving this thing, Jack Lewis, as a Helen Harris' son, was there. Very fitting. Here's the invitation that was sent out for the gathering of the celebration, and the picture of the plaque that was put up on the date, June something or other, 27. Several years ago, when I first moved to the village, Jeff Max said to me, "You don't own your house, you just keep it for the next person." And the work that I've done to put this together made me think, we're the village and we're just keeping it together for the next person. But I've shown that there was a decline that seems nearly impossible when you think about the buildings that were there that had been lost. That's what I got from this. At the beginning I said, who are the new people in town? You're the ones that continue this. You're the ones that have to continue this. Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
We'll take any questions if you have any before you leave. If anybody has anything in the back of their mind, if not. Yep. Go ahead.
What was the first house that was built in the village?
We believe
Number
that-
one.
We believe that it is half of Bob and Linda Connor's house.
Okay.
The
The
current.
first cottage. Oh, the one that is now. I said half of it, because of all the addition. The front half, I mean, Paul and I were in there. I was always understood that the front half of that building, which is now that kitchen,
House number one.
done. But there were 13
I
cottages built
figured it
in
was the auditorium.
years. I guess it was around the circle were all in that early World War I. Yeah.
In addition to the fountain there, there's another fountain in the corner of Ambrose and Lake or Andrews and Bowman. And is that an original fountain? And then there's one in space. I mean, there are other fountains around that are original. Because looking at the, I was called the dream map, there are several fountains. I'm wondering how many of them actually got built.
I